Montana, 2018. The first snow of October dusted the town of Willow Creek, painting rooftops and pine trees in delicate white. Children trudged to school with scarves wrapped around their necks, the cold air carrying laughter and the distant clatter of trains on tracks that had seen generations pass. In the quietest neighborhood, the Larson home stood like a sentinel of something lost. Its windows reflected the gray sky, and inside, the air was heavy with memories of someone who had disappeared. Emily Larson had been just 16 when she vanished, and now, 5 years later, the world had all but written her off. Her room, untouched since that fateful day, smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Posters of space shuttles and fighter jets clung to the walls, yellowing at the edges. On her desk, a journal lay open, its pages filled with sprawling handwriting detailing ambitions, fears, and dreams too large for the quiet Montana town. Her parents, Mark and Evelyn Larson, had kept everything the same, unwilling to let go. They had to believe she might still be alive. Sometimes at night, they would imagine her walking through the door, laughing, carrying stories of distant lands and adventures beyond their small town. The news outlets had long since given up. After exhaustive searches, after tips that led nowhere, after promises of miracles that never came, Emily was officially declared dead. An obituary ran in the local paper. Emily Larson, 16, beloved daughter and sister, lost to the world but remembered forever. It felt like a cruel punctuation mark on a story no one wanted to end. Her friends moved on reluctantly, classmates graduated. Yet in the Larson house, life seemed suspended, frozen in the autumn of her disappearance. On the morning of October 12, 2023, 5 years later, a small private plane climbed steadily into the crisp Colorado sky. The pilot, Thomas Keegan, was known for his meticulous attention to detail. He was preparing for what he thought would be a routine training flight, one that would take him over the sprawling Rocky Mountains, pushing his aircraft and his own limits for the day. He checked instruments, adjusted the throttle, and glanced at his co-pilot with a nod of confidence. The sun gleamed off the fuselage, painting it in streaks of gold. Yet, within minutes of takeoff, everything changed. Midway through their ascent, Thomas felt an odd pressure in his chest. His vision blurred, the familiar lines of the cockpit bending unnaturally. He tried to call out to his co-pilot, but words refused to form. Panic rose like a tide. His body went limp and the plane wobbled dangerously. The co-pilot, a young but competent aviator named Sarah, gripped the controls with white-knuckled determination. The altimeter ticked upward, the needle vibrating like a heartbeat in a body under siege. Sarah's training kicked in, yet even her skill couldn't mask the terror coiling in her stomach. This was not an ordinary emergency. Then it happened. The radio crackled to life, piercing the tense silence of the cockpit. A voice, clear, calm, and eerily familiar, cut through the static. "Shadow Fox, this is Emily. Emergency. Coordinates 39.7 by -104.9. Sarah froze, her hands tightening on the yoke. Thomas blinked, still trembling but catching enough focus to hear the words. Emily. The name hung in the air, impossible yet undeniable. The call sign Shadow Fox sounded coded, military-like, something that would have been utterly meaningless to anyone outside certain circles. But somehow, it was linked to a 16-year-old girl who had disappeared 5 years ago. Below, the Rocky Mountains stretched endlessly, peaks jagged like broken glass against the sky. Clouds swirled, casting shadows that shifted like ghosts across the terrain. In the control tower at Denver International, operators leaned forward, eyes wide. No commercial or private flight in the registry matched that call sign, yet the coordinates were precise and the voice was real. The radio repeated the call and the tension in the room became almost physical. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. As the co-pilot fought to stabilize the plane, she couldn't stop her mind from racing. Who was Emily? How could she be alive? In her training, she had learned to handle emergencies, to respond to crises, but this transcended any scenario she had ever faced. This was not merely about aerodynamics or engine failures. This was about something bigger, something rooted in history, secrets, and survival. In the Larson home, Mark Larson sipped his morning coffee, the newspaper open in front of him. He wasn't expecting news of Emily. Yet somewhere in another city hundreds of miles away, fate was converging on the Larson family in a way that would shatter their understanding of reality. He felt a shiver creep along his spine, unexplainable, like the subtle warning of a storm approaching. Evelyn, humming softly while tending to her garden, paused mid-motion. Somewhere beyond the mountains and clouds, the daughter they had mourned, searched for, and almost given up hope on was alive. Alive, and calling out in a language only some would understand. The F-22 pilots stationed at Peterson Air Force Base were suddenly alerted. Their radar systems picked up a small, fast-moving aircraft, off course, weaving through airspace in a way that defied standard flight patterns. A voice came over the secure military channel, reporting the anomaly. Unidentified aircraft. Possible emergency. Coordinates match. The transmission cut abruptly as the pilot's own heart skipped. Then, as if drawn by gravity and fate alike, the radio repeated the impossible message, clearer, insistent. Shadowfox. Emergency. Coordinates 39.7 by -104.9. This is Emily. In that moment, thousands of eyes, air traffic controllers, pilots, and even some civilians watching the mountains from afar, held their breath. Emily was not a ghost. She was not a hallucination. She was a living, breathing, impossibly skilled pilot, transmitting a call sign that no one had ever heard in real life. And for the first time in 5 years, the world was forced to confront a question that had no easy answer. Where had Emily Larson been all this time, and how had she survived the impossible? The sky above Colorado grew tense, the sun dipping low and casting a fiery glow over the Rockies. The small plane shuddered midair, as if sensing the storm not yet visible in the clouds. Sarah, gripping the controls with every ounce of strength, glanced at Thomas, who was slowly recovering but still pale as a ghost. They were caught in a drama bigger than themselves, one that had begun years ago in a quiet Montana town and now unfolded over mountains, rivers, and endless stretches of sky. And then, as the plane pitched slightly, struggling against an unseen force, another voice joined the radio. This time, the unmistakable roar of F-22 engines breaking the sound barrier. A deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Shadowfox, do you copy? Identify yourself immediately." The cockpit was silent for a beat too long, and then Emily's voice, steady, commanding, yet tinged with something unplaceable, relief, fear, and determination, answered. "This is Emily. You don't know me, but you need to listen." And with that, the first domino of an impossible story fell into motion. 5 years of mystery, grief, and unanswered questions were about to collide with reality, high above the mountains, where survival, secrets, and extraordinary skill were about to reveal themselves in ways the world had never imagined. The F-22 pilots banked sharply, preparing to intercept. Emily gripped her controls tighter, and somewhere deep inside she knew that this flight, this impossible, terrifying, miraculous flight, was only the beginning. The roar of the F-22 engines was deafening, a mechanical thunderclap over the Colorado Rockies. Emily's small plane bobbed through turbulent currents, weaving like a ribbon caught in a storm. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the yoke, but her breathing remained measured, deliberate, as if each inhale and exhale was part of a strategy she had rehearsed 1,000 times before. She wasn't just surviving the altitude or the weather. She was surviving the reaction of the world that had assumed she was dead. At Peterson Air Force Base, radar operators were frantically tracking the unidentified aircraft. The coordinates matched the ones Emily had transmitted, yet there was something impossible about this flight. The plane was small, civilian-looking, but its maneuvers were anything but ordinary. Tight rolls, sudden dives, and rapid climbs, movements only a highly trained pilot could execute without losing control. Every operator knew this wasn't just an emergency. It was a message, and the stakes were enormous. Lieutenant Jake Reynolds, one of the F-22 pilots assigned to intercept, couldn't take his eyes off the radar. She's outmaneuvering standard interception protocols, he muttered, disbelief lacing his tone. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Sarah O'Connor, leaned closer. That's no civilian. Whoever's flying that, they've had advanced training. Military grade. High above the Rocky Mountains, Emily adjusted her heading, calculating distance and timing with precision. Every move was deliberate, each correction a demonstration of muscle memory honed in isolation. Her mind flashed back to her training, covert flight programs, experimental aircraft maneuvers, survival drills that pushed her to the brink. She had spent years preparing for this moment, although she hadn't known it would be 5 years in the making. The F-22s closed the gap. Their black frames gleamed in the sunlight, cutting through the clouds like predatory birds. On board, Reynolds attempted communication again. "Shadow Fox, identify yourself. This is an armed interception. Comply or risk engagement." Emily's response was calm, measured, almost chilling. "I'm not your enemy, but if you interfere, you will regret it. I have nothing to hide, but I have much to protect." Reynolds froze. That voice, familiar, yet alien, sent shivers down his spine. The tone, the authority, and the subtle defiance suggested someone who had been trained to handle crises far beyond the scope of civilian pilots. And the call sign, Shadow Fox. There was history here, history that he couldn't yet place. Below, the rugged terrain of the Rockies offered no mercy. Peaks jutted into the sky like jagged teeth, and winds whipped across the valleys, buffeting Emily's small plane. One wrong move could send her tumbling into the abyss. Yet she moved with fluid grace, anticipating every current, every gust, every obstacle. It was as if the mountains themselves bowed to her command, and for a fleeting moment she felt invincible. As the F-22s flanked her, Emily realized she had to make a decision. They weren't here to shoot her down, they were here to investigate. And she couldn't allow anyone, not even trained pilots, to follow her blindly. With a flick of her wrist, she initiated a maneuver that left even the F-22s momentarily off balance. The jets banked hard, trying to keep up, engines screaming, wings straining against physics itself. The air traffic controllers in Denver were in chaos. Radios crackled with confusion and panic. "She's executing maneuvers beyond civilian capability," one controller shouted. "Is this a military exercise? We've had no notice." Another voice cut in, terse and commanding. "Do not engage. Observe only. This pilot may be special." Emily's thoughts flashed back to that day 5 years ago, the day her life fractured. She had been part of a classified program, recruited as a teenager for her extraordinary reflexes and ability to process flight simulations at a level most adults couldn't achieve. The project was secret, hidden even from family, a labyrinth of training, observation, and missions no one outside a select circle could imagine. One mission had gone catastrophically wrong, leaving her stranded, presumed dead, and erased from every official record. Now, the world she had been ripped from collided with the one she had re-entered. F-22s loomed on either side, sophisticated military hardware responding to a ghost. She couldn't speak freely, too much knowledge, too many secrets. Yet she had to guide them, just enough to survive and to maintain the upper hand. Reynolds exchanged a glance with O'Connor. "Do you know who she is?" he whispered, more to himself than to her co-pilot. O'Connor's jaw tightened. "I've read the files, only briefings. She's a phantom. Top-level clearance, disappeared years ago. She was supposed to be dead." Emily didn't wait for them to figure it out. She pushed the plane to the edge, diving into a narrow canyon where radar struggled to maintain contact. The F-22s followed, threading the mountains like shadows, but even their superior technology couldn't replicate the instincts she had honed over half a decade of survival. She banked sharply, rolling over a ridge, and in that instant she felt the full weight of her isolation, the years of hiding, of running, of surviving without human contact, all culminating in a single breathtaking sequence of flight. And then, without warning, the impossible happened. A warning light flashed on her console, engine temperature spiking, control surfaces trembling. The plane groaned under stress. Emily's breath hitched. If the engine failed here at this altitude, there would be no room for error, no flat ground for a safe landing. Below, the jagged peaks mocked her, sharp and unforgiving. The F-22 pilots saw it instantly. Reynolds' hand hovered over the radio. "She's in danger," he shouted. "She doesn't have much time." Emily, fully aware of the risk, made a split-second decision. She would not be caught, nor would she surrender. With a combination of precision, instinct, and nerve, she executed a maneuver that defied expectations. The small plane dropped into a shallow valley, skimming treetops, then ascended rapidly, leaving a cloud of debris and displaced air in its wake. The F-22s, despite their power, struggled to follow without losing control. For a brief, harrowing moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Emily's voice came over the radio again, steady and calm, tinged with a haunting certainty. "This is only the beginning. Keep your distance. Listen, learn, but do not interfere. Your world isn't ready for what's coming." The pilots exchanged looks of disbelief. Who was this girl? What had she endured? And what did she mean by what's coming? As the sun dipped lower behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted landscape, Emily's plane disappeared into a low-hanging bank of clouds. The F-22s followed, cautious now, wary of every turn, every rise, every invisible current. Something extraordinary was unfolding, something that had started with a disappearance and was now escalating into a drama that no one, not even trained military personnel, could fully comprehend. And deep within the clouds, hidden from view, Emily allowed herself a single fleeting smile. She had survived. She had been assumed dead. And now, after 5 long years, she had returned, not just to exist, but to command the sky and the attention of the world she had left behind. The mountains held their secrets. The sky trembled with tension. And below, the world waited, unsuspecting, unprepared, and unaware that the girl once declared dead had become a force beyond imagination. The Rockies had always been unforgiving, but today they seemed almost sentient, testing Emily Larson as if the mountains themselves were guardians of secrets too dangerous to reveal. Her small plane sliced through low-hanging clouds, engine whining, wings shivering under the strain of maneuvering that would make most pilots lose control. The F-22s were relentless, black silhouettes against a bruised sky, banking sharply to maintain visual contact, their pilots' eyes never leaving her aircraft. Yet even these marvels of engineering were challenged by Emily's skill. Every turn, every dip, every sudden climb was executed, with a precision that suggested instinct and experience far beyond her age. Lieutenant Jake Reynolds felt his chest tighten as he fought to keep up. The small plane was unpredictable, weaving in ways that went against all conventional training. She's not just trained," he muttered under his breath. His co-pilot, Sarah O'Connor, didn't reply. Words failed her as adrenaline surged, forcing her to rely on muscle memory honed through years of combat simulations. Every second stretched into an eternity. Emily's mind was a storm of strategy and memory. She could almost hear the whispers of the instructors who had trained her in isolation decades earlier: anticipate, adapt, survive. Every maneuver she made was a balance of calculated risk and raw instinct. But it wasn't just survival. She had to send a signal, one that only certain trained pilots could decipher. She had to ensure that those chasing her understood that she was not an enemy, that she was extraordinary, yes, but also human. Below, townspeople in the Rockies caught glimpses of the surreal spectacle. Black streaks of F-22s chased a small silver plane, darting between clouds like lightning. Smartphones recorded videos, and local news helicopters scrambled to cover the anomaly. Children pointed skyward, gasping, while parents whispered to each other in disbelief. Some speculated a military drill gone wrong, others feared a rogue pilot. None could imagine the truth. The girl they thought had been dead for 5 years was alive, controlling the sky with skill that made every observer's jaw drop. Emily glanced at the instruments, noting an approaching valley too narrow for either F-22 to safely follow. It was a perfect trap and she knew it. But she didn't intend to trap anyone. She intended to survive while sending a clear message. Precision was key. Any error would spell disaster. As she banked sharply into the canyon, the engine screamed, the metal groaning under pressure. Trees passed mere feet below her wingtips. The ground twisted, rocks jutted up like shards. And above, the F-22s had to slow slightly, maintaining altitude but losing some of the advantage they held in maneuverability. On board the nearest F-22, Reynolds whispered almost reverently, She's doing what we've only trained in simulations. She's alive and she's brilliant." Sarah O'Connor's knuckles were white around the control stick. "She's playing chess with the sky," she said quietly, "and we're the pawns." Emily didn't pause. Her thoughts flashed back to her disappearance. The day of the catastrophic test flight, the crash that should have killed her, the secret rescue that erased her existence from every record. She had lived among shadows for 5 years, surviving on training, instincts, and the occasional aid from contacts whose loyalty was absolute. She had been a ghost. She had been invisible. But now the world was coming for her whether she wanted it or not, and she would not be caught unprepared. The F-22 pilots tried to radio again, but Emily responded not with words, but with maneuvers that told a story only they could read. She zigzagged through the mountains, executed rapid climbs, and rolled over cliffs with the kind of skill that blurred the line between fear and admiration. Her aircraft was a silver streak against the darkening sky, a phantom weaving through natural obstacles and human technology alike. Suddenly, a warning light flashed on her dashboard. Fuel levels were lower than expected. Panic flickered briefly in her chest, but she suppressed it. She had anticipated this scenario. Her calculations were precise. There was just enough margin to reach an alternate landing point hidden deep within the Rockies. Somewhere she had been preparing for this moment for years, a contingency drilled into her mind, as much a part of her as breathing. Below, the F-22s maintained visual but struggled with the terrain. Reynolds gritted his teeth. "She's leading us somewhere, but where?" he asked. O'Connor shook her head. "Doesn't matter, just stay on her tail. Observe, don't interfere." Emily's voice came over the secure channel again, calm, yet commanding. "You don't know me, but you will. Keep your distance. And remember, some truths are more dangerous than lies." It was cryptic, but it had weight. The F-22 pilots exchanged uneasy glances. There was knowledge there they weren't supposed to understand, warnings embedded in tone, cadence, and choice of words. And above all, there was courage, a courage born of survival, isolation, and impossible circumstances. As the mountains stretched on endlessly, Emily spotted a narrow strip of plateau below, hidden from radar and aerial observation. It was her target, a makeshift landing zone she had used before, reinforced and camouflaged to blend with the environment. She descended cautiously, aware that one wrong move could shatter both her aircraft and her years of careful secrecy. The F-22s hovered above, giving her space, though not entirely trusting. Radar picked up the terrain's interference, and the pilots realized that Emily was leading them into a controlled space she had designed to remain hidden. "She planned this," Reynolds muttered. "Every move, every maneuver, it's a map, a plan." Emily's hands tightened around the yoke as the ground rushed up toward her. Her pulse was steady, controlled. Every muscle remembered what it had been trained to do. She flared the plane just enough to soften the impact, touching down with a controlled jolt. The landing strip, hidden among rocks and trees, held. The plane shuddered to a halt, engines whining in protest. She exhaled, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. The F-22s descended slowly, circling the hidden plateau. Reynolds observed, awestruck. "She's alive," he said quietly. "Not just alive, trained, prepared, untouchable." Emily climbed out of the cockpit, her hair plastered with sweat, face streaked with grime from the flight. Her eyes scanned the horizon, alert, calculating. She had survived the impossible, outrun the extraordinary, and now she stood at the edge of a revelation that could change everything. And then, just as she allowed herself a heartbeat of triumph, a shadow moved among the trees. A drone, small but unmistakably armed, hovered silently, cameras trained on her. Emily's breath caught and instinct took over. She ducked behind the fuselage, scanning rapidly. Someone or something was here. Someone who had tracked her and had waited 5 years. Her heart pounded. Her body, still trembling from the maneuver, tensed. For the first time in years, she realized that surviving her disappearance had been only the beginning. The chase was not over. Above her, the F-22s hovered, engines humming like predators in the sky, witnessing a drama they could not yet comprehend. Below, in the trees, the drone waited, silent, ominous, and deadly. Emily's eyes narrowed. 5 years of secrecy, training, and survival had led to this moment. And now she faced not just discovery, but confrontation. She clenched her fists. She was ready. Emily Larson crouched behind the fuselage, her lungs burning as the drone hovered silently above the trees. Every second stretched into a lifetime. She could see the sun slipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows that blended with the natural camouflage of the plateau. But the drone's sensors didn't rely on sight. They were precise, mechanical, and ruthless. One misstep and it would relay her position to whoever was controlling it. Whoever had tracked her for 5 years. Her mind raced. She had survived the impossible, outmaneuvered the most sophisticated F-22s in existence, and yet here she was, faced with a new threat she hadn't anticipated. Emily's past wasn't just her history. It was a map, a series of secrets meticulously hidden, and now the world was closing in. The memories came rushing back, unbidden. She had been recruited as a teenager for an experimental flight program. At first, it had seemed like a dream. The chance to fly planes designed for testing cutting-edge technology, to train under pilots who were legends in the military community. But the program was secret, top-tier classified, and utterly isolating. They promised her survival, protection, and secrecy. But when the test mission went catastrophically wrong, the system that had trained her abandoned her to the shadows. They erased her existence. For 5 years, Emily had lived on the fringes of civilization, moving quietly, surviving harsh winters, mastering survival techniques, and continuing to train herself to fly. She had been invisible, untouchable, and relentlessly prepared. And now, finally, she had returned, not merely to be seen, but to reclaim control. The drone shifted, changing its position slightly. Emily's heart skipped a beat. It was a reconnaissance drone, likely linked to whoever had been monitoring her all these years. Her survival instincts kicked in. Every move had to be precise. She could not allow them to trace her back to her hidden sanctuary. With a controlled breath, she activated a small device she had hidden under the fuselage, an electromagnetic pulse generator. A brief pulse disabled the drone temporarily, sending it spinning erratically before it stabilized and hovered again, more cautious now. From above, the F-22s were still circling, maintaining visual but keeping a respectful distance. Reynolds' voice came over the radio, tense but calm. "Shadow Fox, do you read? You're not alone out there. Identify yourself. We need to understand what's happening." Emily hesitated. The F-22 pilots could help or they could complicate matters. She weighed the risk in a split second. Then she replied, her voice steady but cryptic. "You don't know me yet, but the story you've been told about me isn't the truth, and some truths are dangerous." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "We're trained for danger," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "We can handle it, but you're something else entirely." Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe, assessing the environment. The plateau was remote, a perfect defensive position, but she needed to move. The F-22s had witnessed her flight skill, but they didn't understand the full scope of her abilities. They didn't know the depth of her training, nor the psychological resilience that had been forged through isolation and survival. She could not let them see everything. Yet. Not yet. She activated the small auxiliary engine she had installed in secret years ago, designed to provide short bursts of power for emergency maneuvers. The plane shuddered to life. a quiet hum barely audible above the natural wind and the distant roar of F-22 engines. With careful, precise movements, she began to taxi along the hidden runway, preparing for takeoff. Every motion was deliberate, rehearsed, and controlled. The F-22s watched intently, their pilot's fascination growing. Reynolds could not hide his astonishment. "She's preparing for another flight," he muttered. "She's calculating every detail, every contingency." Emily's mind drifted back again to her final mission before disappearing. The test flight had been designed to push the limits of human and machine. She had been warned, trust no one, follow protocol, survive at all costs. The crash had been orchestrated as an accident. The agency wanted to cover it up. To the world, Emily Larson was dead. To her, it had been a lesson in endurance, secrecy, and self-reliance. And now, that lesson was paying off. She throttled up, the plane accelerating smoothly along the hidden runway. With a precise pull of the yoke, she lifted off into the fading light, the wings catching the last rays of the sun. The F-22s mirrored her ascent, careful to maintain distance but close enough to track every movement. They could see now, more clearly, the extraordinary precision she had displayed in the sky. Reynolds' voice broke the silence. "I've flown hundreds of missions," he said, awed, "but I've never seen anything like this. She's operating on a different level. She's not just alive, she's perfected survival and combat flight in a way we didn't think was possible outside simulations." Emily kept her focus. She could feel the tension in the F-22s, the anticipation of discovery. They wanted answers, but the answers she carried were dangerous. She had learned over 5 years that knowledge could be more deadly than bullets, and exposure could be fatal. Whoever controlled the drone, or whoever had orchestrated the years of secrecy, was still out there. And they were not done. Suddenly, a faint glint appeared on the horizon. Another drone, a glimmer of light bouncing off metal. Emily's pulse quickened. She had underestimated someone or something, tracking her progress. Years of survival had taught her to expect the unexpected, but this was different. This was deliberate, targeted, and immediate. The F-22s responded instantly, banking sharply toward the threat. Reynolds' voice was tense, commanding, "Identify, identify immediately." Emily's hands gripped the controls. She had to keep moving. She had to maintain the edge. And in that moment, the first realization struck her. The people who had made her disappear 5 years ago were still watching, still hunting. Her survival was no longer just about evading the mountains or outmaneuvering the F-22s. It was about facing the shadows of her past. And the past was far closer than she had ever imagined. As she prepared for a daring maneuver through a narrow canyon, Emily knew one truth above all. The world had forgotten her, but the people who mattered most, the ones who had shaped her, trained her, and tried to erase her, had not. They were coming for her, and she would have to confront them head-on. Her eyes scanned the darkening sky, her mind calculating possibilities, contingencies, and escape routes. The mountains below seemed to twist into jagged, living forms, mirroring the chaos in her mind. And somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the line of sight, the invisible hunters moved closer, waiting for her next move. Emily Larson, once declared dead, now alive and unbroken, prepared to confront the truth. And the world, military, civilian, and secretive agencies alike, was about to discover that the girl who had vanished 5 years ago had returned stronger, smarter, and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The canyon ahead narrowed, the shadows deepened, and the next seconds would define whether she survived, revealed her secrets, or vanished again into the shadows forever. The canyon twisted and turned beneath Emily Larson's plane like a living, breathing labyrinth. Each jagged cliff and rocky outcrop demanded precision. The altitude was perilously low, the engine humming with a faint, ominous vibration that threatened to grow into catastrophe at any moment. Emily's fingers gripped the controls with a force that made her knuckles white, but her breathing remained even, calculated. She knew the risk. She had survived years of deadly maneuvers, but this was different. This wasn't just survival, this was confrontation. Above her, the F-22s flanked the canyon entrance, black silhouettes against a sky bruised with clouds and the setting sun. Reynolds and O'Connor maintained formation, careful not to intrude too closely but unwilling to lose sight of Emily. They could see her skill firsthand, a level of flight mastery that defied logic. She weaved through the canyon with an almost preternatural awareness, every movement deliberate, fluid, impossible to replicate. "She's not just piloting," Reynolds muttered under his breath, awestruck. "She's orchestrating the air around her. Every current, every gust, she's in control of it." Emily's mind was elsewhere. Memories she had suppressed for years surged unbidden. The classified training, the simulated emergencies that became real-life survival lessons, and the crash that was meant to erase her existence. Every flicker of recall fueled her instincts, reminding her why she had to remain unseen, why she could not allow anyone to close the distance completely. Then it happened. A violent shudder ran through her plane, metal groaning as if protesting the strain. The warning lights flashed red, engine overheating. She felt a spike of fear but suppressed it immediately. She had prepared for this. Years of survival had taught her to expect the unexpected, to adapt instantly. She recalculated the trajectory, factoring in the canyon walls, the wind currents, and the proximity of the F-22s. The F-22s noticed immediately. Reynolds leaned forward, voice tense but controlled. "She's in trouble. Engine overheating. She needs to stabilize or we could lose her." Emily's eyes narrowed. Losing altitude in the canyon would be catastrophic. One wrong maneuver and the jagged cliffs below would shred the plane and her instantly. But she refused to falter. She throttled the auxiliary engine she had installed years ago, designed for emergency power surges. The vibrations eased slightly, but the danger remained palpable. Below, the canyon floor rushed upward, rocks and trees blurring into a jagged tapestry of potential disaster. Emily banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a jagged rock formation that seemed to reach for her wings. Her pulse raced, but her mind was razor-sharp. Survival demanded calm calculation, not panic. She adjusted the flaps, compensating for the overheating engine while maintaining maximum maneuverability. The F-22s mirrored her movements, constrained by size and speed, yet unable to match the raw agility she displayed. Reynolds couldn't stop a whisper of astonishment escaping. "She's impossible. Every move, every maneuver, it's like she's rewriting the rules." Emily glanced at the altitude indicator, sweat dripping from her temple. Time was running out. If the engine failed entirely, there would be no safe landing. She had to find a way out of the canyon, into open air where she could maneuver more freely and reassess. Her hands flew over the controls, executing a series of rolls and climbs with surgical precision. And then she saw it. Another glint in the distance, faint, metallic, moving unnaturally. Her stomach dropped. Another drone, larger this time, armed and tracking her flight path. Whoever had orchestrated her disappearance 5 years ago was not idle. They had been waiting, observing, and now they were closing in. Emily's voice came over the secure military channel, calm but firm. "You don't understand the situation. Maintain distance. This is not a test." Reynolds' eyes widened. "Not a test, she's telling the truth. Whatever's coming, it's serious." The drone adjusted its trajectory, moving rapidly to intercept. Emily's auxiliary engine roared to life, giving her the burst of speed she needed to dodge the immediate threat. The maneuver was dangerous, skimming perilously close to the canyon walls, but it worked, just barely. The F-22s followed, carefully navigating the same treacherous terrain. Emily's thoughts raced. The drone was too sophisticated to be ordinary. It wasn't just surveillance. It was designed to immobilize or capture, likely armed with technology she hadn't encountered before. Whoever controlled it knew her capabilities, or at least had anticipated them. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus. Panic would kill her faster than the canyon ever could. She remembered the final lessons from her training: anticipate, adapt, survive. She banked sharply into a narrow crevice, descending rapidly while allowing the drone to overshoot. Then, with a precise surge of power from her auxiliary engine, she climbed sharply, leaving the drone behind and creating a natural barrier with the canyon walls. For a moment, she allowed herself the tiniest flicker of triumph. But she knew it wouldn't last. Whoever had sent the drones, and whoever had orchestrated her disappearance, was still out there. The F-22 pilots could see it too, the sheer audacity and precision of her flight. Reynolds turned to O'Connor, voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "We're witnessing a masterclass in survival and combat aviation, and she's only scratching the surface." Emily scanned the horizon, her eyes catching a hidden plateau, a possible landing zone far below, concealed from radar and satellites. She had prepared for this. Years ago, she had mapped every possible emergency site in the Rockies, anticipating a scenario just like this. With careful precision, she angled the plane for descent, ready to make contact with the ground, while remaining hyper-aware of the drones and F-22s above. As she descended, a low hum emanated from the canyon walls, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration. Emily stiffened. It wasn't natural. Something was embedded in the rocks, a tracker or sensor feeding real-time data to whoever was orchestrating her pursuit. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to focus. Every maneuver, every adjustment had to be calculated down to the second. One misstep could spell disaster. The F-22s maintained their observation, witnessing every move. Reynolds shook his head in disbelief. She's alive, she's aware, and she's controlling everything around her. She's extraordinary. Emily's pulse steadied, her breathing controlled. She was determined to survive, to maintain the upper hand, and to reveal only what she chose. She banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a jutting rock face, then accelerated toward the hidden plateau. The drone followed, but Emily's instincts and years of covert survival training kept her one step ahead. Finally, she touched down on the plateau, skidding slightly but safely. The engines roared in protest, but the plane remained intact. She climbed out, scanning the horizon with sharp, calculating eyes. The canyon below was a maze of shadows and danger, yet she had navigated it flawlessly. Then she froze. Another drone, larger, armed, and unmistakably hostile, hovered at the edge of the plateau. Emily's jaw tightened. Whoever had been tracking her for 5 years had found her, and now they were ready to make their move. Her survival was no longer just about skill or instinct. It was about confrontation. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long, ominous shadows across the plateau, Emily realized that the chase was far from over. The world she had returned to was more dangerous than she had imagined, and the forces that had erased her existence were now moving to reclaim her. She clenched her fists. She was ready. The F-22s hovered above, engines humming like predators, witnesses to a drama they could barely comprehend. And in the canyon below, shadows moved with intent, signaling that Emily's 5-year ordeal was about to enter its deadliest chapter yet. The air on the hidden plateau was crisp and still, but tension crackled like static electricity. Emily Larson crouched behind the fuselage of her plane, eyes scanning the tree line where the armed drone hovered silently. Every fiber of her being was on high alert. She had survived impossible odds before, but now the threat felt different. This was no ordinary pursuit. This was personal. Above, the F-22s hovered cautiously, engines roaring in a controlled display of power. Reynolds and O'Connor exchanged nervous glances. Neither could deny the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Emily wasn't just a survivor. She was something else entirely. Someone who had been erased from existence yet returned with skills, instincts, and knowledge beyond comprehension. Reynolds leaned closer to the microphone. "Shadowfox, we need to know, who are you, and what happened 5 years ago?" Emily hesitated. Her voice was steady, calm, but laced with an undercurrent of steel. "What you've been told is a lie. Everything you know about me, my disappearance, my training, my life, is only part of the story, and some parts are dangerous to reveal." O'Connor's brow furrowed. "Dangerous how? We're not here to hurt you, we just need answers." Emily's gaze shifted to the distant tree line. The drone, larger than before, adjusted its position slightly, signaling the presence of a human operator nearby. That operator had been watching her, tracking her for 5 years, likely orchestrating her erasure from official records. The realization hit her like a punch to the chest. The people behind her disappearance were still active, still powerful, and still hunting. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain calm. Her mind raced as she formulated a plan. She couldn't reveal everything, not yet. The truth was explosive, capable of toppling agencies and exposing classified programs that had existed for decades. And yet, she had to signal the F-22 pilots that she was not a threat. "You need to understand," she continued, her voice measured. "I was part of a covert program. Recruited as a teenager for my reflexes, my instincts, my ability to process complex flight simulations at a level most adults cannot achieve. The program was classified. My training, everything I experienced, was designed to prepare me for scenarios that no one else could survive." Reynolds swallowed hard. "That explains the maneuvers, the precision, but why vanish, why disappear?" Emily's eyes darkened with the memory of betrayal. "Because the last mission went wrong, catastrophically wrong. They abandoned me, and then officially I was declared dead. I survived alone for 5 years. Every skill I honed, every instinct I sharpened, it was to prepare me for today and for what's coming." O'Connor's voice wavered. 5 years alone, that's unimaginable." Emily nodded. "It was survival, yes, but also preparation. I've been waiting, watching, learning, and now the world is intersecting with the shadow I left behind. Whoever orchestrated my disappearance, whoever is controlling that drone, they're not finished. And they never will be unless I face them directly." The larger drone in the tree line buzzed faintly, signaling that the operator had moved closer. Emily's pulse quickened, but her hands were steady on the controls. She could anticipate the drone's next move. It had been designed for precision attacks, not improvisation. And improvisation was her specialty. The F-22s watched intently. Reynolds whispered to O'Connor, awestruck, "This isn't just a pilot. This is someone who has redefined survival, combat flight, and situational awareness. We're witnessing a human weapon, and she's 5 years ahead of everyone else." Emily activated a small device tucked beneath the fuselage, an electromagnetic pulse generator. It emitted a quick, controlled pulse, disabling the drone temporarily. The mechanical bird spun erratically, hovering before recalibrating. Whoever had sent it was clearly monitoring the disruption, calculating her capabilities. Emily knew she couldn't stay still. She needed mobility. She throttled up the auxiliary engine, allowing the plane to lift off and ascend rapidly, breaking the line of sight between her and the hidden operator. The F-22s mirrored her ascent cautiously, unwilling to intrude but unable to leave her alone. As the plane climbed, Emily allowed herself a brief glance at the Rockies below. She had returned to a world that had moved on without her, but the echoes of her past were catching up. Every memory, every skill, every instinct she had developed in isolation now served a single purpose: survival and revelation. Reynolds spoke into the radio again. "Shadow Fox, you're extraordinary, but you need help. You can't do this alone. Whoever's behind this, they're powerful, trained, and patient." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Help comes with a cost. I've survived for 5 years without interference, without attachment. I will not allow anyone else to be caught in this until I understand the full scope." Her mind raced. The drones, the F-22s, the hidden operators, all were pieces in a puzzle she had to solve. And she knew that revealing her full capabilities now could be catastrophic, not just for her but for anyone linked to the original program. She had survived being erased from existence. She could survive 5 more minutes, but the next steps would determine everything. Then the impossible happened. A second F-22 broke formation, rapidly descending toward a narrow canyon entrance below. Emily's heart skipped a beat. They were moving too fast, too recklessly. Something had changed. Something had triggered their response. Her voice came over the radio, calm but insistent. "Hold your position. Do not descend into the canyon. It is a trap. You cannot predict what lies within." Reynolds' voice wavered, laced with tension. "Shadow Fox, what do you mean? Identify the threat." Emily glanced downward. Shadows shifted in the canyon, unnaturally precise. Not natural formations, not wildlife. Equipment had been deployed, sensors, weapons, traps targeting anyone who entered. Whoever had orchestrated her disappearance had anticipated this scenario, designed the canyon to be lethal. And now the F-22s risked triggering it. Her pulse quickened. The revelation was chilling. Her enemies weren't just tracking her. They were prepared to eliminate anyone who interfered. She had been 5 years ahead of them, but now the danger extended to others. She banked sharply, gaining altitude and signaling the F-22s to follow cautiously. Her voice remained calm, authoritative. "Observe, do not engage. They are prepared. One wrong move and lives will be lost. Trust me. I know this terrain, these systems, and their methods. Follow my lead or you will regret it." Reynolds and O'Connor hesitated, caught between instinct and caution. They had the technology, the training, and the firepower. But Emily had the advantage of experience, knowledge, and survival honed in isolation. They realized with growing awe that she wasn't just extraordinary, she was untouchable. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the jagged peaks. Emily Larson, once declared dead, now fully alive and supremely capable, prepared to confront the full scope of her past. The canyon below, the drones, the hidden operators, all were pieces in a deadly game, and she was ready to play. Her voice over the radio was calm, commanding, and resolute. "The past has returned. The world will see what it thought was impossible. Follow carefully and survive." Above, the F-22s banked, engines screaming, as Emily led the way into the unknown. Shadows of her past were converging. The truth of her disappearance, the full scope of the covert program, and the danger that had been hunting her for half a decade were all about to collide. And in the fading light, Emily knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not be caught, not today, not ever. The wind howled through the rocky mountain canyons like a living thing, carrying with it the echoes of years of secrecy and survival. Emily Larson's plane cut through the air with surgical precision, the fading light glinting off its fuselage. Every movement was deliberate, every calculation exact. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt and the knowledge that the past she had survived for 5 years was converging on her now. Below, the canyon twisted like a jagged maze, cliffs towering on either side. The hidden operator had anticipated every maneuver, every turn she might take. Sensors and drones dotted the landscape, some disguised as jagged rock formations, others hovering silently, awaiting the slightest deviation. Emily's pulse quickened, not from panic but from the challenge. She had prepared for this, trained for this, waited for this, but the stakes were higher than ever. Above her, the F-22s flanked carefully, engines roaring like predators in a sky filled with danger. Reynolds and O'Connor maintained formation, now fully aware that Emily was not just a pilot. She was a force unto herself, a phantom of skill and survival that no technology could easily counter. "Shadow Fox," Reynolds spoke into the radio, his voice tense, almost reverent, "we're detecting multiple threats on the canyon floor. Sensors suggest traps. This is more than surveillance, it's tactical. Who are we dealing with?" Emily's jaw tightened. Not everyone is visible yet. Some threats are built to anticipate human reaction, mechanical, programmed, lethal. You cannot engage them without triggering consequences. Trust me on this. O'Connor's brow furrowed. You've seen this before." Emily didn't answer immediately. Memories flickered through her mind. 5 years of survival, the secret missions, the betrayal, the agency that had declared her dead. She had walked through death more times than she cared to count, and now, those who had orchestrated her erasure were finally revealing themselves. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady. "I've seen it, and I know how to survive it, but you need to follow exactly as I direct. One wrong move and this canyon becomes a tomb." Reynolds and O'Connor exchanged glances, their skepticism giving way to awe. They had trained for high-stakes scenarios, faced simulated emergencies, and flown missions they thought were dangerous. But Emily Larson was operating on a level they had never witnessed. She wasn't just responding to the environment, she was controlling it. Every maneuver, every climb, every turn was designed to exploit weaknesses only she knew existed. Below, a faint glint reflected off a ridge. Emily's eyes narrowed. Another drone, larger, armed, and unmistakably hostile, hovered just above the tree line. Whoever controlled it had anticipated her flight path and was preparing to intercept. She didn't flinch. She throttled the auxiliary engine, executing a rapid climb that left the drone momentarily behind. But the canyon was unforgiving. The walls closed in as she twisted through narrow passages, cliffs scraping past her wings. The drone recalibrated instantly, tracking her with mechanical precision. Emily felt the familiar thrill of survival surge through her. 5 years of solitude and training distilled into these moments of perfect focus. The F-22s followed cautiously, their pilots now fully aware of the danger. Reynolds' voice broke the tense silence. "Shadow Fox, you're extraordinary, but there's something else. Whoever did this to you, they're still active. They're powerful, and they're anticipating your every move." Emily didn't reply immediately. She scanned the canyon floor, calculating, adjusting. She had survived their anticipation before, and she would survive it again. But this time the stakes were higher. The F-22s could observe, they could record, but they were not yet part of her plan. This confrontation required precision, secrecy, and control. Suddenly, a low rumble vibrated through the canyon. Emily stiffened. It wasn't natural. Her instincts screamed danger. Ahead, a series of automated defenses, camouflaged sensors, and mechanical traps awaited. She had expected resistance, but the speed of their deployment suggested intelligence behind it, a calculated attempt to corner her. She banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a collapsing boulder triggered by one of the hidden sensors. The drone followed, adjusting instantly, but she anticipated its movements. With a sudden dive, she skimmed the canyon floor, twisting through jagged rocks with a precision born of years of survival and extreme training. Above, the F-22s mirrored her movements cautiously. Reynolds' voice came through again, tense. "Shadow Fox, do you see what's happening? This is advanced, tactical planning. Whoever did this, they've anticipated decades of skill. You're facing a ghost network." Emily's pulse quickened. A ghost network, an organization that had erased her existence, tracked her every move and prepared contingencies for every survival tactic she might employ. For 5 years, she had lived in shadows, invisible, untouchable. But now, the shadows had taken form, and the full scope of their reach was becoming clear. The canyon narrowed further, forcing her into a tight corridor of rock. The drone accelerated, its sensors locked. Emily's breath was steady, mind sharp. Every muscle memory from covert training, survival drills, and years of isolation activated in perfect synchronization. She executed a daring maneuver, a rapid roll, followed by a sharp climb, that sent the drone overshooting, momentarily destabilized. But the danger wasn't over. A series of secondary drones, smaller but faster, emerged from the canyon walls. Emily's eyes widened slightly. They were ready for her, coordinated and deadly. Her survival depended on outthinking them all in seconds. She banked sharply, dodging, weaving, and climbing with surgical precision. The F-22s maintained observation, engines screaming in the canyon, unable to match her agility but witnessing her extraordinary control. Reynolds whispered, awestruck, She's She's rewriting the rules of flight. Emily knew she couldn't rely solely on maneuvering. She needed a strategy to turn the tables. Her fingers flew over the controls, activating small electromagnetic pulses she had embedded in the fuselage years ago. The pulses disrupted the drone's sensors, sending them spinning and creating a narrow window of opportunity. With calculated determination, Emily dove toward an alternate canyon exit, one the F-22s had been unable to detect. She banked sharply, engines roaring, and emerged into open sky. The mountains spread beneath her like a living map of danger, yet she had navigated it flawlessly. The F-22s followed cautiously, now fully aware of the magnitude of her capabilities. Reynolds' voice was tense, reverent. "Shadow Fox, we need to understand everything. You're more than a pilot, you're a force, and I don't know if the world is ready for what you've survived." Emily's eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. Beyond the mountains, beyond the drones, lay the truth she had been chasing, or perhaps it had been chasing her all along. Whoever orchestrated her disappearance, whoever had built the ghost network, was still out there, and the confrontation was far from over. She allowed herself a brief exhale. The edge of discovery was close, but she was ready. 5 years of survival, isolation, and relentless training had led her to this moment. And as the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting long, ominous shadows, Emily Larson, once declared dead, now fully alive and untouchable, prepared to confront the final pieces of the puzzle. Her voice, calm but commanding, came over the radio one last time before the night fully fell. "The past is coming. Stay close, stay alert, and remember, some truths are more dangerous than lies." Above, the F-22s banked, engines screaming, witnessing a drama that defied comprehension. Below, the shadows of her past moved closer, signaling that Emily's return was not just a miracle, it was a warning. The edge of discovery was here, and Emily was ready. Night had fallen over the Rockies, casting the jagged peaks into near-total shadow. Emily Larson's plane glided silently through the darkened air, a silver streak against the inky sky. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the knowledge that everything she had survived, every skill honed over 5 years, would culminate here. The network that had erased her, hunted her, and built an army of drones to trap her was finally within reach. And tonight the truth would surface. Above her, the F-22s maintained a cautious formation, engines thrumming like restrained predators. Reynolds and O'Connor had watched her every maneuver, seen the near-impossible acrobatics, and now understood the staggering scale of what they were witnessing. Emily was not just a pilot. She was a living weapon forged in secrecy, isolation, and survival. "Shadow Fox," Reynolds spoke, his voice taut with tension and awe, "whatever's coming, we're with you. But you need to be careful. This network, it's more than drones and traps. They've anticipated every move." Emily's eyes scanned the darkened valley below. She had studied the terrain for years, memorized every ridge, every hidden plateau, every canyon exit. But she also knew the network had evolved. They had learned, adapted, and were now attempting to predict her. One miscalculation, one hesitation, and disaster would strike. Her fingers danced over the controls, throttling up the auxiliary engine, preparing for the next maneuver. From the tree line below, shadows shifted. The operator who had controlled the drones emerged, partially visible in the dim moonlight. Emily's pulse quickened. The hunter had stepped into the open. She recognized him instantly, a face from the past, someone she had trusted once, someone whose betrayal had cost her 5 years of freedom and forced her into invisibility. The operator raised a hand, signaling the remaining drones to advance. Automated traps began to activate along the valley floor, hidden tripwires lighting up faintly, sensors scanning for movement. Emily's heart didn't falter. This was what she had prepared for. Above, the F-22 pilots adjusted their altitude and speed, carefully observing, unable to interfere directly but ready to act if necessary. Reynolds muttered, "She's about to show us the full extent of her abilities. God help anyone on the ground." Emily executed a rapid dive toward the valley floor, skimming the treetops with razor-sharp precision. The drone swerved, sensors overloaded by the electromagnetic pulses she had embedded in her plane. Automated traps triggered prematurely, a cascade of false alerts and harmless detonations that gave her the critical window to ascend again. She banked sharply, pulling the plane into a narrow canyon exit she had used during prior training missions. The operator on the ground cursed, realizing that the plan he had orchestrated for months was failing. Emily's movements were unpredictable, fluid, and terrifyingly precise. The drones, despite advanced AI, could not match her instincts. She had anticipated their responses, countered them, and remained 5 steps ahead. Reynolds' voice over the radio broke through the tense silence. "Shadow Fox, you're rewriting the rules. She's extraordinary, completely untouchable." Emily's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a test of survival, it was a reckoning. Years of betrayal, isolation, and erased existence had led to this moment. She wasn't just proving she was alive. She was reclaiming her narrative, exposing the network that had tried to control her life. The operator activated a final drone, a massive armed craft with precision targeting. Its sensors locked onto her plane with deadly accuracy. Emily's pulse surged, but fear had no place here. She banked sharply, spiraling up into the night sky, engines roaring. The F-22s followed cautiously, witnessing an aerial display that combined skill, instinct, and raw determination. Emily executed a series of daring maneuvers, rolls, dives, and rapid climbs that pushed her plane to its limits. The massive drone fired, but the shots missed, grazing harmlessly above the canyon floor. She countered with another electromagnetic pulse, sending the drone into temporary disarray. It spiraled out of control, crashing spectacularly into the mountainside. The operator on the ground stared in disbelief, realizing that Emily had not only survived his carefully constructed traps but had also turned the tables. She had anticipated every move, outmaneuvered every drone, and outthought every calculation. 5 years of erased existence, of training and secrecy, had forged her into something no one had expected, a living force of precision and survival. Emily's voice came over the secure channel, calm but commanding. "Your network is compromised. I've survived your traps, your drones, and your attempts to erase me. The world will know the truth, whether you like it or not." The F-22 pilots remained in formation, witnessing the culmination of what they had long suspected. Emily Larson was not only alive, but she was unstoppable. Reynolds whispered, barely audible over the roar of the engines, "She's unbelievable. She's alive and she's uncatchable. She's a ghost." The operator made a last desperate move, retreating toward a hidden vehicle in the shadows. Emily's eyes tracked him with surgical precision. She banked sharply, her plane gliding silently through the darkness, and for the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself the faintest flicker of satisfaction. She had survived, she had outmaneuvered the hunters, and she had reclaimed control over a world that had tried to erase her. The F-22s descended slightly, maintaining observation as Emily circled the plateau. She landed smoothly, the engines whining softly, a controlled display of precision that left the F-22 pilots in awe. Reynolds exhaled, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. She did it. She survived it all. She's human, but beyond anything we've ever trained for. Emily stepped out of the cockpit, her hair streaked with sweat, face marked by determination and exhaustion. She scanned the plateau, eyes sharp, mind calculating the next move. The operator was gone, but the message was clear. She had survived the impossible, and her secrets were safe, for now. Her gaze lifted to the F-22s hovering above. Reynolds' voice came over the radio one last time, reverent, almost emotional. "Shadow Fox, the world needs to know. We've witnessed what you've survived and what you're capable of. You're alive and you're extraordinary." Emily allowed herself a faint smile, but her eyes remained vigilant. Survival had never been enough for her. Reclamation, control, and revelation were now the mission. She had been declared dead for 5 years, but she was alive, untouchable, and unbroken. The sun began to rise behind the mountains, casting long golden rays across the plateau. Emily's plane gleamed in the early light, a symbol of survival, determination, and human resilience. The F-22s banked one final time, acknowledging what they had witnessed before ascending back toward their base. Emily Larson, once erased from existence, now stood fully alive. The shadows of her past had chased her, tested her, and sought to erase her again. But she had endured. She had outmaneuvered, outthought, and outlasted them all. And as the morning light illuminated the hidden plateau, she realized the final truth. Some people are not meant to be forgotten. Some people, no matter how deeply hidden, will rise, reclaiming the life and identity that was stolen from them. And in that moment, the girl who had been declared dead for 5 years smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet, unshakable resolve. She was alive. She was unstoppable, and the world at last would have to reckon with her. The end.